We're here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Monday, June 29th here in Seoul. I'm Isujin, and this is News Generation. Joining us today is Fabio.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Also Niles with us.
Good morning.
And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So it's the start of a brand new work week, and we're kicking things off with a topic we don't often talk about, but one that everyone unfortunately eventually encounters at some point in life. So today we're taking a closer look at funeral culture. So to kick off our discussion, I want to start by asking our panelists. So Fabio, starting with you, what has your personal experience with funerals been like?
Well, I have been living in Korea for the past 3 years, and I wasn't expecting to attend that many funerals, but I've actually been to 3 so far.
Already.
Back in Spain, funerals are usually quite short, and children don't attend that much. So most of my experience with funerals has actually been here in South Korea, and there were a lot of cultural differences, and I think it's going to be very interesting to talk about them today together with Niall.
So Niall, what has your experience been like?
So as you guys know, I grew up in Morocco, and I guess fortunately I've only been to 1 or 2 funerals or wakes, but what's interesting is that Islamic funerals are very quick with the burial process because the tradition encourages burial within the first 24 hours whenever practical. And so since then, I've come back to Korea and witnessed how much longer it takes for Korean funerals to go from the actual death into the burial process. But it's interesting to see how various cultures pay their respects to their loved ones.
So like you said, in Korea, families often spend several days receiving visitors, whereas, like you said, in Islamic tradition, it looks like the focus is on laying the deceased to rest as soon as possible. So it's fascinating how the same purpose, honoring a loved one, can be carried out in such different ways depending on culture and also religion. And that's why we're going to talk more about this. But first, let's take a look at the screen. Whether it's due to ongoing economic pressures or a growing shift towards simpler, more practical ways of marking life's milestones, many major social events are becoming smaller in scale and less formal than before, including weddings. And another important social ritual that is also undergoing noticeable change is funerals. Today on News Generation, we take a closer look at how funeral culture in Korea is evolving in response to these broader social changes and how it compares across different countries, while also asking what a truly meaningful farewell looks like in today's society. Just as we saw in the video, funeral practices around the world are changing and can look very different depending on culture, tradition, and evolving social values. In Korea, that difference is especially clear when it comes to how funerals are held. So now, how would you describe, I guess, Korea's funeral culture?
I guess one thing to know about Korean culture, we mentioned this a lot, the filial piety or hyo in Korean, it really is valued under the influence of course, the Confucian thought. And funerals are considered one of the most important events for a family member to all gather. And traditionally, funerals are held over 3 days with a funeral hall set up to receive visitors throughout that period. And guests and bereaved family members often stay up through the night and receiving people, drinking, sharing food together. And the atmosphere can seem quite lively and even bustling. And people believe that this vibrant gathering helps ensure that the deceased does not feel lonely in their final journey. As a result, Koreans have traditionally viewed a crowded funeral home filled with visitors as a sign of good social influence during their lifetime and prestige of the deceased and the family members.
So this highlights how funerals in Korea are not just about mourning, but also about community and respect for the family. But this idea of a long collective mourning process can feel quite different to outsiders. So what stood out most about Korean funerals compared to those in Spain? So you've been to 3 so far.
Yes, as you mentioned, it might be a little bit different from the perspective of outsiders. So when we talk about Western European cultures, for example, the funeral experience tends to be very quiet and solemn, despite the strong belief in the afterlife that we have in Christianity. Rather than being celebratory, it feels like a place where people mourn and grieve the loss of that person. But as Nala mentioned, here in Korea, the 3-day period and the involvement of meals and alcoholic alcoholic drinks were a big culture shock to me. Most people at Korean funerals were quiet and reflective from my experience, but some other guests were a little bit more noisy or even visibly drunk. Since this would be considered improper at, for example, a Spanish funeral, I did ask some of my friends why they wouldn't scold these guests or let them know that they were being noisy. And they explained that everyone has to respect different ways of mourning. And I also found myself worried about the family members that have to endure 2 sleepless nights with some guests coming even at 3 or 4 in the morning. To the extent that I even stayed overnight once to help some friends so they could manage everything a little bit more easily. Another cultural difference was the condolence money, which isn't really common in Western European funerals. And also visitors usually place a white flower in front of the memorial altar, which is called binso in Korean, and there you have the photo of the deceased, and you would usually greet the family members, which is also quite different from what I experienced in Spain.
It's quite interesting. So is food and alcohol drinks not common in funerals?
It's
Are they
not
allowed?
necessarily completely excluded, but it's not part of the main event. It's not like in
I
a
see.
Korean funeral, you usually enter the space and you can already see the sitting area where food is provided. Food is a big part
yeah.
of socializing and communicating with the family, but it's not necessarily that important in Western European countries.
Interesting, I see. So that contrast really shows how cultural expectations shape even the way we say our final goodbyes. And interestingly, this long-standing tradition in Korea is actually now starting to change up a bit. So how is Korean funeral culture changing today, Niall?
Yeah, Fabio explained the concept of binso, but these days there is a growing trend towards funerals without a viewing hall, and we call them 무빈소 funerals, and even shortened to 2-day funerals rather than the traditional 3-day service. And in fact, even though the number of deaths is increasing due to Korea's aging population, the number of funeral homes and funeral service companies is actually declining. And this decisive turning point was apparently due to COVID-19 pandemic. And during this period, when people were actually discouraged from visiting funerals in person, there was a broader recognition that emerged that you could still pay your respects and express condolences without spending long hours at the funeral hall. But traditionally in Korea, the closer you are to that relationship to the deceased or bereaved family, the longer you stay, and like Fabio mentioned, even staying overnight with the family members. But another factor is the shrinking of kinship-based social networks. As extended family ties have weakened over time, the burden of organizing and attending family ceremonies has fallen more heavily on individual and nuclear households. And lastly, of course, the cost is a major concern. In 2015, the average funeral cost in Korea was about 14 million Korean won. And this back then with the exchange rate was roughly around 10,000 to 12,000 US dollars. But since that figure is from a decade ago, the actual cost is likely even higher right now. And for many families, funeral expenses have become this significant financial burden.
Right, so it's not just tradition shifting, but also practical and economic pressures that are driving this change. So then how do younger Koreans feel about this changing Korean funeral culture, Fabio?
It's quite interesting. It seems that most of Koreans, regardless of age, view this changes positively. So if we take a look at the screen, for example, we can see that when it comes to changing funeral practices, including having no wake or reducing the funeral period from 3 days to 2 days, 76% of Koreans overall view these changes positively. Interestingly though, amongst all age groups, people in their 20s had the lowest percentage of positive responses, with only 67%. People in their 30s were at 75%, while those in their 60s and older reached 82%.
Wow.
Although younger generations value practicality, it's quite interesting to see how these unexpected results might actually suggest that many young people either have a strong desire to properly honor the deceased, or maybe they value having more guests, probably because of the way that you can mourn together, or because it might cover the cost of the funeral through condolence money. Even so, a clear majority still welcome these changes, and around 60% said that they viewed traditional Korean funeral culture negatively. The main reasons were the high cost of funerals, the burden of hosting visitors, and the expectation of drinking guests throughout the night.
That's quite interesting because I feel like with weddings, young people are more than open to cutting down costs, but for funerals, they're a bit more hesitant about that.
I was also quite shocked to see a more conservative perspective from younger generations because I would expect them to be more open to change and different ways of exploring this tradition when it comes to funerals.
But I guess maybe it's because it's not about themselves. They're thinking more about it might be a funeral for their parents or their grandparents, so then they feel a bit uncomfortable doing that.
As someone who's a friend with a Korean who has had to experience that whole funeral process, I can tell that it's a pretty complicated and expensive journey. And
For
so
sure.
having a more, how should I put it, secure system that allows you to fulfill that duty in a more clear way might be more approachable overall.
Right, that's true. So, to get a broader perspective on funeral traditions this time around the world, we'll be speaking with someone from Pakistan. That conversation will take place right after break, so don't go anywhere.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search out Channel Arirang News. Click Posts and cast your vote in the poll. Make a new type of news with us.
We're joined now by Majid from Pakistan, who has attended funerals in both Korea and in his home country. So hello, Majid. Thank you so much for connecting with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's always good to be here at Arirang.
Great to have you back. So, Majid, what are some funeral customs unique to Pakistan, and how do you think they differ from those that we see in Korea?
Well, Pakistan is predominantly a Muslim country, and of course, there are people of other religions who live there, and they follow the funeral practices according to their own religions. But all the Muslims, we follow the Islamic teachings. And one of the differences when I compare to Korea is the timing. So, like you guys were talking about, even Fabio was saying, like the funeral basically in Korea would take up to 3 days, but in Islam and also in Pakistan, the deceased body should be buried within almost less than 24 hours. And this is to, honor the deceased body, and that, it has to return back to the creator. So this whole process is done in less than 24 hours. Another big difference is when we hear that someone has passed away, we usually recite a Quranic verse. It says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun, which means that we all belong to the Almighty Allah, Almighty God, and we all will return to Him. So this verse is also one of the difference that, once you hear any news, it can be your family member, it can be any member of the society, it's a tradition, and you have to recite this Quranic verse. Another big difference is that the body is washed in a ritual. It's called ghusl, and of course it is done in a private area, and men usually wash the body of men, and women would do for women. And but this is again it's a process to simply purify the body, that now that person is meeting the God. So that whole process, washing the body, is called ghusl, and that's also one of the difference. Another thing which is also a kind of beautiful aspect of Islamic teaching is that the body is wrapped in a white cloth. So maybe Nail would know, if she was in Morocco, that the white cloth is called kafan. And when I was saying it's a beautiful aspect, it in a way, because Islam preaches equality, and that's why it does not matter whether you're a billionaire or whether you're a poor or rich. Everyone the body would be wrapped in a white cloth. It should not have any painting, it should not have any graphic on it. It's just simple white cloth. So that's why the body should be in that white cloth, irrespective of who you are, because of Islam preaches the teachings of equality. And then another difference is, once the body is in a coffin, in that white cloth, then the people, the family members, friends, and other community members would get together in a very big space, and then they offer prayer and ask for forgiveness of the body from the God, and then they offer prayer, which is called Salatul Janaza, and after that the person is buried in a land. And once again, the land, we don't have to pay for that space that you are in that graveyard. You don't have to pay for that. It's publicly, and some people donate that space for for people. So yeah, these are some of the differences I would say compared to Korean culture.
Well, it's so interesting to see how different funeral practices might be depending on the cultural context. But we also have seen in Korea that there is a constant evolution when it comes to culture. So how have funeral customs in Pakistan changed in recent years?
Honestly speaking, because Pakistanis and especially Muslims, they follow the teachings of Islam, I don't think that there has been a bigger changes overall in all the rituals of funeral. But I would say a few things might have changed. For example, now like it's a global world that I mean, we live in a global village, so people are, some are not in that countries. Let's say some people or some family members, they are not in Pakistan, they are in other countries. So, and it's difficult for them to fly to Pakistan within 24 hours. So they would recite that prayer. They could do that online. And if in case some people are in a lot of numbers in other countries and overseas, they would even offer the prayers with themselves and then ask for forgiveness of the body from the God. So that's one of the difference. And also, now people would send the condolence messages online and messages, voice messages, video messages like that. I guess that's the only few differences I believe. Oh yeah, and one more thing. Now a lot of, let's say, Pakistanis are living in Korea, and if someone dies here, of course you can bury them here in the cemetery in Korea, but the family members would prefer that the body should be sent to Pakistan. So the Pakistani embassy in Korea and the Pakistani community, they would arrange that thing, and they do that without charging anything from the family. So they would send the body to Pakistan by plane so that it can be buried among the other family members in Pakistan. So yeah, that's some of the things that have evolved. But overall, the funeral customs, because we follow the Islamic teachings, have remained the same.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. It's so fascinating to see how different cultures celebrate and celebrate their life and really honor the deceased. But what do you think is the most important purpose, if you will, of the funeral?
I mean, well, like you guys were saying, well, like Fabio was saying also that, it is to honor the deceased, right? That is one of the main purpose that, to honor the deceased, to ask for forgiveness, and also to comfort the family members. So, of course, we have cultural differences between Spain, between Korea and Pakistan, but main values are, and the main purpose is the same, to comfort also the family members. And also in Islam, I would say one thing is, when you are in that Salatul Janaza, when you are offering the prayer, it's also a time to reflect on your life. And we all believe that, we all have to meet the God. So at a funeral, everyone, it's a time to reflect on them, on themselves, on their lives. So everyone wants to be kind because we all have to pass away one day, so everyone wants to be more kind to the people with their loved ones, with their family members. So reflection is also another important aspect of this whole funeral custom. Another thing is the community get together and the feeling of strong bonding among the community, especially in Pakistan and maybe in Morocco also, and in most of the Islamic Muslim countries. Once someone died, the family member, of course, the family is grieving and they are in pain. So what happens is other family members, they would actually arrange meals. So some family member would arrange dinner, someone would arrange breakfast for the next few days, so that there should not be burden among for that family whose member has passed. So other family members would arrange meal, and they will in order to comfort them and to tell them that you are not alone, we are among you. Another thing that I really like is in Pakistan, for example, my dad, he donated the land for people to offer the Salatul Janaza, because a lot of people, maybe up to 1,000 people usually would get together, and more than that, and to offer the prayer. So people actually donate land for the prayer, and some people would donate the land for the whole cemetery. And that's why you don't actually have to pay for anything for these things. So that's one of the beautiful aspects of Islamic culture, and especially in Pakistan.
I mean, thank you for sharing that, because I think it's really hard to get the opportunity to learn how different cultures say their final goodbyes. And it's really, even though it's obviously Korean culture, there are differences with Islamic culture. You can also at the same time hearing you talk about the different traditions. There's things that I can relate to. That you talked about how important it is to reflect, and that's something that I think people from all cultures can understand how important and beautiful that really is. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
And I also got to know about Spain and Korea also. And for example, one other thing I really would like to talk about, which is also a cultural difference, is like Fabio was saying, in Korea and also maybe in Spain, you have to put a picture of the deceased and people would bring white flower. Like in Islam, we don't do that. We don't put a picture. So you don't actually have to bring flowers at the funeral. You can bring flowers later on the mudam, on the grave, but you don't do that before you bury the body. That's also one of the culture. But once again, we all have the cultural differences, but the values and the main purpose of the whole funeral ceremonies, funeral rituals are the same, to honor the deceased and to tell the family that, we are all together in this time of, pain.
So it's true. Each culture has a beautiful way of saying their final goodbye. So thank you for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
very
having
much.
me. Thank you.
So we just spoke with someone from Pakistan about funeral traditions there, how it compares to Korea's, and how customs there have changed over the years. But funeral customs can vary just as widely across Europe as they do across Asia. So what's funeral culture like in Spain and also across broader Europe?
Well, as I briefly mentioned earlier, funerals in Spain and Western Europe are generally very private, family-centered, and also emphasize quiet mourning and a somber atmosphere. So they are usually held at a church, a cemetery, or a funeral home. They also tend to be very short, at a specific day, a specific time, and most people attend together. So once the ceremony is over, that is the end of the funeral. Unlike Korea, there is no tradition of giving cash condolence money, and other than that, many aspects such as paying respects and wearing black clothes are actually quite similar.
Right. So now are there any other countries that have notably different funeral customs?
I would say in the Western United States, the emphasis less on the mourning of the death itself and more on celebrating and honoring the life of the deceased. Sometimes it shows up in a humorous way, but typically mourners pay their final respects in front of a casket. Sometimes it's an open casket, sometimes it's closed, where they're laid to rest. They observe a brief moment of silence and then offer the bereaved family a light embrace and words of comfort.
So it's interesting how some cultures focus more on mourning the loss, while others focus on celebrating a life well lived. But despite these differences, funerals around the world ultimately serve a similar purpose. So to close off our discussion today, what makes a funeral truly meaningful regardless of culture, in your opinion, Fabio?
I think we already reached this conclusion after the interview, but without a funeral, I would feel almost like writing a sentence without a period at the end. So the atmosphere and the way people mourn may change depending on the culture, but I think the heart behind it is very similar everywhere. Death is not something you can easily ignore or move on from. So having a specific moment where you can actually honor that person's life and also self-reflect is incredibly important. I also think that reminding us about how delicate life really is life-changing. Every time I've been to a funeral, the few days after, I always had a lot of personal thoughts, and I think going through that process is also very important to reconsider your own life.
Right. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think Fabio said it as well as Majid, and it's all a common factor amongst everybody who celebrates the life of the deceased. But in Korean, there's a saying when we say, you learn more at a funeral home than at a wedding. And it really is a time to reflect. And no matter what culture you come from, being there for your friend or family in their time of need, it really is one of the biggest gestures of love, whatever country you come from. So I think it's a beautiful thing to be a part of.
Right, so today's discussion reminds us that there's no single right way to say goodbye. Funeral traditions may differ from one culture to another, but the purpose remains the same, to honor those we've lost and support those left behind. And perhaps that's what truly gives a funeral its meaning. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of News Generation. But News Gen will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time with more stories and discussions. A big thanks to Fabio.
Thank you for having me.
And also Niall.
No problem.
And to our viewers, thank you so much for watching. And hopefully today's discussion reminds us all to make both our hellos and our goodbyes more meaningful. We are News Generation.